From the studio at Allied headquarters, this is the Allied Angle, where we take an in-depth look at current market trends with industry experts. I'm your host, Amber Guthrie, and if you caught part one of our conversation with Jon Fancey, CTO of PortX, welcome back. And if you're just joining us, I'd encourage you to go back and start there, because what we covered lays the foundation for today's conversation. In part one, Jon and I dug into the real state of integration for financial institutions, why modernization has been so hard, where AI is already making a measurable difference, and how it's reshaping the data challenge from the ground up. Today, we're shifting the lens to talk about what all that really means for FI leaders, the risk, the competitive implications, and what the road ahead looks like. Jon, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, you know what? We learned about you last time, so this time we are just going to dive right in.
Sounds good.
All right, so in part one, we talked about how AI is making a real difference in integration data today, which is all very exciting. But I want to open part two with the other side of the coin, and that's risk. There's real anxiety in financial services around AI, model risk, regulatory scrutiny. How should institutions think about governance when AI is embedded in something as foundational as their integration and data layer?
I think in the ways you just described, I think all of these are valid concerns, right? And I think fundamentally the way I look at it is you need proof, you need evidence, right? So that's why regulators exist. That's why regulation exists, because people want to understand that you understand. Like fundamentally, where are the checks and balances? So if something, some new technology or something you're implementing is not explainable, then you should be exceptionally cautious, right? And I think there was a mad rush over the last couple of years to embrace these tools without understanding. And I think regulation is always going to play catch up on how quickly businesses can move, because regulators will ask different questions to what businesses will ask. But I think anxiety is real, right? But it comes down to how are you building explainable systems, like fundamentally? And what are you putting in place to make sure that they remain explainable and don't run away from you and start making decisions that you don't understand? Because then it becomes something that you can't trust and you won't believe any of it.
That anxiety, though, it's helping people. It keeps them honest. It keeps them asking questions to make sure that everything is. So it's a good anxiety is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing to have.
I think skepticism is okay, but I think people should have more of an optimistic skepticism, right? It's good to ask the right questions and think about it. But I think denial kind of skepticism is the wrong frame of mind, because you close your mind to the possible and throw all of the risks and anxieties and everything in the way, and that isn't helpful.
And that's when you're going to get left behind.
That's when you're going to get left behind. The best way to use this stuff is to understand it. It always starts with that.
Which is going to be a continuous thing, because it just keeps changing and growing.
Yep, 100%. But that's what makes it exciting.
Indeed. It has to be a challenge for institutions to build responsible AI frameworks in real time when regulators are still trying to play catch up too. How do you think about building for compliance when the rules are still being written?
Yeah, who knows what rules will be written? And this is one thing I've really I've been in and out of banking for I don't know, 20 years, and I'm fully back in it full time right now. And I think that things will continue to evolve. I think this is a space that's being impacted by a couple of things, honestly, right? There's AI, yes, for sure, but there's also much more than that happening in financial services right now. What we've seen over the last 10 plus years is the just dramatic rise of fintechs, right? Organizations, nimble companies, startups who have seen opportunity for maybe the juiciest parts of what banks do, like payments, and figuring out ways to make that more efficient at scale than an individual bank may be able to do. And this opportunity causes problems for banks because it's, core parts of their business, not least. But it's also driven a huge expansion of the entire industry, right? Again, it comes down to one of these things. We go, well, it's a bit like people with the arguments with AI. Is it going to take everyone's jobs? It's like, no, but the jobs will probably change and there'll be more of those. So again, optimistic skepticism for sure. In terms of how do you think about rules that are yet to be written? I've kind of look at things like the Genius Act, Clarity Act, from the stablecoin space, where the rules have been written. They haven't been fully agreed. They're not quite law yet. They're getting pretty close though. But there will be more, right? And there'll be more in AI as well. If you talk to any of the AI kind of leading companies, they will tell you they're expecting regulations. So how are they thinking about that? I think it's healthy for everybody to think about it, because ultimately I would hope that the rules will follow some kind of guidelines which are immutable, which just makes sense. Like, don't, was it the Google thing, like, don't be evil, right? It's like, fundamentally, there are some things that are going to be very hard to argue against that you didn't expect regulation for. So just ask yourself the kind of question you would expect your customers to ask you. Is my data safe? Are you making the right decisions? How do you know you're making the right decisions? Like, these kind of existential questions are the right ones to ask, because essentially that's where the regulations will form from. People won't do those things. They will do the wrong things. AI will make mistakes. The regulators are always going to look at how do we protect the system, from systemic risk, and how do we protect the consumers and users of that system to protect them from the risks of using that system. I think everything kind of should stem from that.
So if you look 3 to 5 years out, what does the integration layer of a financial institution look like when AI is fully embedded? What becomes possible that is just not happening today or possible today?
In part one, I kind of mentioned this, and I didn't explain it, so let me explain it a bit here. I mentioned kind of AI native. I feel like that's kind of the newest kind of term that people are using. We've used the word native for a while, digital natives, cloud native. I think AI native is the latest incarnation of this, but what it means is a little different to what it's meant in previous contexts. I think when you look at what AI native means, it's really imagining what your organization would look like if you built it with AI in the middle of it instead of at the edges. I think what we see today, and it probably drives some people crazy, is just like bots and other things just slapped on top of some UI on the website or something else. And it's almost an annoyance, right? This thing pops up and says, how can I help you? And it's like, well, you've been using the same app for 5 years and you know exactly what you're doing. You don't need any help. So unless it's going to actually get better at understanding why you're visiting and what you're trying to do, these things are literally bolt-ons to the thing. And it's just not terribly useful. It's kind of a jarring experience. But when you look at it from being AI native, you think about all of the activities that happen in the organization and whether they should even exist anymore, or whether they are essentially pointless. They're always low value, or they should never really, things should never really work that way in the first place, right? I think the world of kind of payments, going back to that, is kind of really interesting right now because everyone's moving to real-time payments, right? But yeah, ACH and wires and everything still exists. Will they continue to exist? I think, probably not if everybody embraces real-time payments, right, including all the FIs. But I think you as a consumer would be like, well, it's much better to have my money appear instantaneously somewhere else than not, right? And I think the same goes for all of this. AI kind of native thinking drives you in that direction. It's like, why are things slow? Are they slow because that's the way they used to work and now they don't have to work that way? Why do they still work that way? So you reimagine how these business processes work and why they've continued without change, and whether that's a disruptive thing that you can get involved in and take advantage of to change the way the industry actually even works and is kind of glued together. That's the way I look at it when I look sort of 3 to 5 years out. Anyway, it's like, I think there's a lot of traditional processes and rules and other things that will be eroded by what's now possible when you add AI into the mix.
And we were even talking earlier about that every 10 to 15 years, but that's going to probably fit into this 3 to 5 years or sooner even.
And the reason for that, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in any organization or any industry like banking or anything else. I think there's just a lot of stuff, and like people don't ask themselves enough and often enough, like, why they're doing what they're doing, right? It's just a bunch of work. You got to get through it. You got to get home at the end of the day when it's all done, and then you do the same thing again tomorrow. It's just like there's a lot of work that you don't get to again. Going back to, I was talking about backlogs and other kind of things. It's just like there's a lot of work that is buried down the stack that you can do now. I spent a number of years at Microsoft, as I think you kind of covered in the last podcast. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about the philosophy there was people were trying to make themselves redundant, which seems like a really odd thing to say. But when we were building out kind of Azure and when we were building out all these cloud data centers, it was basically impossible to hire enough people to get it done. So you had to rely on automation. And I think it's a really healthy way to look at it in any industry. It's just like if you're doing something that could be automated, then why aren't you automating it? Because there's plenty of things that can't be automated today that you're not getting to. And you should get to those because they're actually more valuable, more interesting, more challenging, right? Again, the thing, it's very easy to just, if you like, kind of give everything up to AI, but we should give up the things that are worth giving up and keep the things that we're better at, right? I think, again, going back to the kind of optimistic skepticism, it's just like you have to believe that humans will always be better than AI at some things. And some of those things we probably haven't spent enough time thinking about what they are, and we should probably be spending our time thinking about that more.
Well, that makes you more valuable when you can focus on the things that are more valuable too. With
Exactly.
everybody being so afraid that their jobs will be eliminated or they will be replaced by AI.
Yep.
Is there a future where AI essentially makes integration self-healing, where systems detect and resolve issues autonomously without human intervention?
Yeah, and I don't think it's that far off. When I talked previously about kind of integration kind of platforms, integrations, platforms as a service, et cetera, how that world's evolved over the last 20 years. Testing has always been one of these areas that's always been challenging. So what do you do when you kind of build integrations between your banking core and other things? You have some element of testing it to make sure it's working correctly. A lot of that's manual, right? And people write tests and they automate the running of the test, but the test writing is still manual. I think we're seeing a huge adoption of generation of both test data, which can literally test every single possible permutation and path through all of the applications that you're building or using to find anomalies. I mean, there's a lot, this is literally what a lot of AI models are doing right now, finding exploits, for example. They're looking for vulnerabilities, but what's a vulnerability? It's something that wasn't coded for that people didn't expect people to do, right? This is literally what it is. It's a bug. So these things are very good at finding bugs. I think that'll translate, and already is translating, to much better testing. Again, testing is another one of those activities where we basically decide we've tested it enough and we ship it anyway, right? I remember reading studies years and years ago that there's only two types of applications that don't have bugs, like military hardware and games, because they're all really well tested to beyond the point of profitability. It's kind of the challenge, right? And you can do it in gaming, although there's plenty of gaming companies who struggle with the level of testing, because if you ship a game with bugs, it's kind of a horrible experience. But these are the only companies and organizations who kind of pull this stuff off. Everybody else, it's always a compromise. You're always shipping things with bugs in it, and you're always trying to find the bugs. So I think that is an area which is being very actively pursued with application of AI to facilitate. And going back to perfect software, that's how we get that, right? You ship things without bugs.
Community institutions often feel like they're playing catch up to the mega banks on technology. Does AI change that dynamic, or does it risk widening the gap further?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I used to ask myself when I was younger, why are there small companies? Why are there small organizations? Well, it seems like you should only need a few big ones, or they do everything. And how do these little companies even get a foothold? And the reason is because they're better at doing something that's a subset of what the big guys do. I kind of turn this around a bit and say, and I use PortX as an example. I quite like working for a smaller organization. I think the bigger organizations today who have tens of or hundreds of thousands of people must be really scratching their heads about what on earth all of these people are going to do if they push hard on using AI across the organization. I'm glad we don't have those kind of problems. And I don't think smaller community institutions should feel like that either. I think it's an advantage being small right now, because you've always been able to be more nimble being small. You've always been able to be more focused on what you do, instead of the big guys who are trying to do everything for everybody and kind of with an equally average experience is kind of where you can end up, right? Which is why people often hate on big companies versus smaller ones, right? Because they just don't serve anybody's needs that well. I'm generalizing massively here. I'm sure there's plenty of big companies who do an awesome job of everything, but I think it's the right way to think about it, though. It's kind of my point, that being small is no longer the disadvantage that it used to be if you embrace this new technology and use it to your advantage. You can look at what the mega banks do and what's attractive to you to do that, going back to the backlog, you've never been able to get to because you're small and you don't have enough people and you're too focused on a smaller number of things, and actually start to look at expanding that without having to massively, increase the number of people doing it. I think that's what makes it really exciting to me. And I think the mission we're kind of on at PortX, working with a lot of community banks and credit unions, is we think we kind of try and punch above our weight. I think everyone has that opportunity now in this space to do the same thing. And I'd love to, it gives me joy to help small organizations kind of do the David and Goliath thing of being able to be outsized in their space.
What's the one thing you think the industry is getting most wrong about AI and integration right now? The conventional wisdom that you would push back on?
I think one mistake people make is they kind of separate and compartmentalize things. I used to say this a lot, that integration is everything. It was kind of my mantra. And I think it's even more everything than it was before, which is really weird because it was more than everything. I don't know. But it's more important. And I thought it was important before. So now it's critically important, I would say. The way all this AI tech works is it's leveraging the ability to integrate with things, right? That's essentially what drives the productivity gains. So I mentioned if you don't have APIs, if you've got kind of batch-based interfaces, you've got a problem, right? Because the AI cannot solve the problem of getting data out of something faster if it's the thing doesn't enable you to get data out of it faster. Like, it's as simple as that. So how do you kind of move to real time? How do you move to APIs? So I think people get wrong. They kind of separate this out as being like AI is this sort of nebulous thing. It's just like, no, it's very specific, because you kind of create applications or you buy applications off the shelf that provide APIs. You should stop buying anything that doesn't, because those APIs essentially turn into tools that then the language models can then consume, right? And just start calling them and integrating them. And that workflow that I talked about, which used to be something that integration specialists would actually create, a sort of sequence of steps and decision logic and everything else, becomes something that LLM can now do and actually automate the act of integration itself. So you have these sort of fundamental core principles, which actually haven't changed in the last 10, 15 years, which is everything should be API driven. Everything starts with a rich set of APIs. And you really want to ask your vendors and ask yourselves, if you're building your own applications, like, do you have completeness of the surface area of those APIs? Like, are there things you cannot do? Because those are things that are going to get you into trouble and prevent you from automating using AI or anything else. You still need people to do this stuff because it's actually really hard. Solving the problem in totality is what's going to actually drive your AI usage to solve more and more problems. The other thing that I think people get wrong is there's a lot of talk around kind of it being probabilistic, right, versus deterministic. And software engineers, like people in tech, just love deterministic things. And even businesses to that extent, because the outcome's the same every single time and there's no variation. I think I would argue against that and say that, like, people aren't deterministic. It's like, that's why regulators exist and regulations exist and rules and laws and everything else exists, because guess what? Some people don't follow them. Yep. Some people go their own path. They make mistakes. Lots of reasons why, but people are inherently probabilistic as well, right? You can ask somebody to do something, they may do something and it's not what you meant, or they may do something completely different, which is definitely not what you meant. So I think when people look at AI, it's kind of that pessimistic skepticism I mentioned. It's just like people discount it. Well, it's kind of probabilistic, therefore I can't trust it. It's like, well, that means you don't trust anything, because pretty much anything you deal with that's actually, worth using or worth talking to is got a very varying degree of randomness in it. So it's how do you drive out the randomness? But it goes back to your earlier question around explainability. It's like, and trust. It's like you need to understand how something is arriving at the decisions it's making and the actions it's taking. And I think people just kind of confuse all of these things and go like, I can't use it because it's not deterministic. It's like, I think that's the wrong framing.
Do you think it's one of those things where it's just the longer people use it and as time goes on, that will kind of start to disappear a little bit?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's always the kind of the arc on new technology. Like, I think 20 years ago when people were booking vacations on the internet, they were always kind of amazed that when they turned up at the hotel, they actually did have a reservation, a room for them, right? I think it comes down to that. Now you'd be amazed. It's like if that wasn't the case, it's just because there's so much confirmation built into the system now that, you get a mobile kind of app notification that your room's ready. You can check in remotely, because it's not the same as it was 20 years ago. It's improved. People have figured out ways to improve that level of trust and confidence that the things you did are actually, were actually done correctly, that you stop worrying about it. And it's only, now things just went wrong, but then that's no longer the case, right? And I think it's the same with all of this. I went to a conference in San Francisco probably 3 years ago about AI. A lot of the speakers who have founded a lot of companies who've become quite big since have freely admitted they didn't understand how any of this stuff worked. They had built this thing and they didn't understand it. And they didn't mean they didn't understand any of it. Like they 100% lack of understanding, but they only understood like 70% of it. Do you know what I mean? And that I think we've come a long way. It's my point I want to make in the last 3 years of understandability. I don't think we're there yet, but I think this is where regulations will come, and regulators will insist on that level of understandability for a bunch of reasons, right? There's like ultimately consumers will be impacted by bad decisions, bias and everything else, and that's bad. In the same ways, organizations have to prove that their people aren't biased and making biased decisions. They'll have to do the same thing with the tech that they use. And that's a good thing.
So actually, I think a good point, or maybe something to think about, is you said 3 years ago, you had these speakers talking about it. They only really understood about 70%. That's kind of a good, maybe even mindset where you don't have to understand everything. But going back to let's lead the revolution. If you know enough about it, just lean into it because that's the future. I mean, that's where things are heading.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes like people who owned a car 50 years ago could probably maintain it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't understand how my car works at all anymore. It's like I have no ability to maintain it at all. It's like it's impossible. It's basically software on wheels.
Right.
So
Chips
I cannot tinker with it. I can't play around with it. I literally hands off. It's not my problem. But it comes down to a level of trust, and it's like any service, right? Like I'm handing responsibility to the manufacturer or to the vendor, right? And I'm good with that. Like I don't have time to do it anyway. Again, going back to the prioritization, I have other things that are more important for me to get done than read the owner's manual or the maintenance kind of workshop handbook on maintaining my own car. It's just like maybe it would be interesting. I don't know, but I'm just not even going to find out. Doesn't matter.
Because then you'll have to pay more to have them fix whatever you messed up.
Yes.
It's just not worth it.
Exactly. It's just not worth it, right? It's just not worth it. It's just like, I like one of my fundamental beliefs is like, I think a life lesson is you just need to get really good at prioritizing because there's so many things that we do that we shouldn't be doing that are less important and less urgent. And, you know, a big believer in kind of a book many years ago, Stephen Covey's like that 7 Habits book of like, just separate that out into a quadrant. Like, are you doing the most urgent and most important things? And if not, why not? And sometimes you just want to kick back and do nothing, and that's fine. But make sure that that's time boxed. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time doing a lot of things that aren't very urgent or important.
Well, and your time is valuable too. So, I mean, that goes into the prioritization. Time is money. So it all aligns there.
Yep.
So we've talked a lot today about the future of AI. With you being the CTO of PortX, is there anything that you can tell us about the future of AI and PortX and anything that is coming that we should be on the lookout for?
There's a couple of things I think are really exciting. And the way, kind of briefly, the way I look at AI, I think it's a good way for everyone to look at it is when you're kind of using it, there's kind of two modes of operation. And I think everyone jumped at the first one, which is like, how do I jam AI into my product, right? That's going back to the chatbot experience. Everybody did that, bolted on top. The other one that people have kind of had to learn to do instead of being forced to do by like, we need AI in our product is how do you use AI to build your products? Mm-hmm. I think that is a journey that we've been on. And I think we did the same things in terms of like, what's our AI narrative for our customers, for our products? But now we're very deeply in like using AI to build everything that we do. And that in itself has been extremely exciting because we've been able to rebuild some of the things that we've done. Again, doing stuff that we simply wouldn't have had the kind of the horsepower to be able to do in the time available to want to do it. It's like what's interesting, I think, is the intersection of those two things because they're not mutually exclusive. You can offer the same capabilities to your customers to build things with AI as the things that you're building with AI, mm-hmm. right? And that becomes very symbiotic, right? And that's kind of where we're at right now. That the kind of next generation of integration kind of tools that we will be, spoiler alert, shipping later this year will demonstrate that we don't really want to be the only ones who have the ability to build all of these integrations and use all of this AI ourselves. We want to give it to our customers to be able to do it all themselves. So we're not in the way of them solving, again, going back to their business problems, right? Using technology and not looking at this as a separation between the two. But what does it look like when you combine them? What does it look like when you can provide people who understand the business? And I think a critical skill, people talk a lot about product management, the rise of the product manager who can now build their own apps without engineers. I think the same is true with business. I think one role that's become more critical and will continue to be so is people who intimately understand their business and have the business knowledge to be able to use these tools to go build things. And that's what we want to enable with what we're building right now.
That's a lot of exciting things coming up. And a lot going on. You have to keep very busy.
A lot going on, yeah.
All right. Well, Jon, thank you again. Across both episodes, you've given our listeners a clear view of where AI is taking the industry.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
If you found this conversation helpful, share with your network and be sure to hit subscribe to The Allied Angle so you don't miss any upcoming episodes.